questions about anyone's hair care.
Have they removed your grandfather from the pulpit yet?
Yes. They buried him. Yeah. Yeah, but there are newspaper reports like people were fainting in the aisles and having to be dragged out of the church. It was really intense. Apparently. Probably really hot too.
Is that online that you could read about that? Is it online that you can read about that?
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, you can actually look at the original newspaper reports.
Excellent.
Emily, where did you live in New York?
Where do I live right now, or where have I lived in New York?
Well, so you don't live in New York now?
Well, yeah, I do. I lived in I think 10 different apartments. Now I live in Astoria in Queens, and apparently it has the most languages spoken in any place in the world.
Did you ever live on Manhattan? In Manhattan?
Oh yeah, I lived in the East Village, I lived in the West Village, and I lived in Chinatown, above the Chinese Restaurant Association. And I was in a legal loft that this slumlord had created. And have you ever seen Being John Malkovich?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you know that little room that they go into? That was my room. You couldn't stand up in my room. You had to crawl up this little staircase, and then on your hands and knees crawl into my room that had a porthole cut out that looked at the living room. And it was an art gallery from 9 to 5. Not like this. This is a legitimate art gallery. My room was an art gallery from 9 to 5, so we weren't allowed to be there from 9 to 5. And I imagine these people going to this art gallery and not knowing there's like 6 half rooms cut out into the walls where people are living. $1,200 a month.
Wow.
Very happy to be here. Very happy to be here. Cockroaches and mice included. Rent, utilities not included.
You have cheaper rent these days?
Yeah, now I pay about half that for 4 times the amount of space.
Wow.
Right on.
Yeah.
Applaud that. I'll applaud that. Yay, decent living.
Yeah. You guys have some more questions?
Do you do singing full time?
Now I do, yeah, I feel really lucky. Since the album came out, I'm a full-time musician, and I'm on tour, and people are buying my album in, I think, 20 different countries, and it's sort of taking off, so. Yeah. It's really good to say that, by the way.
So are the other, you guys are full-time poets too?
Indeed, yeah.
What do full-time poets do?
Wear shirts like that.
Something else to make money.
Well, you're a professor, right?
We both teach.
Yeah, I mean, teaching is a good way to supplement the income, and you get about 5 months off, so.
Do you teach poetry, both of you?
Mm-hmm.
And what made you guys go into that? Like just poetry or writing?
I think for me it was the easiest way to be around the thing that I loved 24/7. And I think too that I really feel like when I'm writing well, I'm teaching well, when I'm teaching well, I'm writing well. I mean that being in a classroom and reading and talking to the students, all of that like feeds the writing. I mean, in fact, I didn't mention this before, but there are a bunch of poems in that book of mine, Wolf Face, where I had assigned a sketchbook project because my students are artists, and rather than having to keep a journal for this literature class they were taking, I asked them to keep a sketchbook where they had to respond to the things that we were reading in terms of marks and lines, but they weren't allowed to illustrate anything. And I picked all those things up, and I got them in, and I had like 25 sketchbooks, and I was like, how the hell am I going to grade these? So I sat down on a weekend and I wrote each student a poem. And mainly I started out by describing things that were in the journal. And some of those poems like wound up in the book. Because if you sit down and you write 25 poems in a weekend, like 2 or 3 of them are probably bound to be pretty good. Or at least something you can work with. So try that. Write 25 poems in a weekend. But I mean, I love teaching and being around the students and being around poetry all the time.
And what was the question originally?
How did you get into that? You know,
Poetry or teaching?
Poetry.
I don't know. I've been writing ever since I was a little spud, ear size. and I don't, and you know, it's just something that I never thought about. I just did it. And then, I mean, I think there came a time years later when I thought maybe I'll like send like a poem out to a magazine or something like that. And the conscious decision to do that, I think, stemmed from this, you know, discovering poetry journals. And I remember the first journal I read that I really liked is called, well, it was called The Canary, but the first issue was called Canary River. And it was, and then the second issue they changed it to The Canary. But I remember reading that and just being really, I think it was in like 2000, 2001, and thinking, well, I guess there's people sending their stuff, not just scribbling in notebooks. And so I just started sending out, and then then it just, you know, it's a process. You just do it, and then the next thing you're like, well, I want to get, you know, write more. I want to get my work out there. I want to talk to other writers and other poets and other artists. And I don't think I ever really made a conscious decision to do that. It was just something that happened organically, just because I wanted to be around particular types of people and wanted to be doing a particular type of thing.
Where do you teach?
I teach in Cleveland. No, I moved from Colorado to Cleveland, Ohio, which was actually my hometown where I was born, in mid-August, and I teach at Case Western Reserve. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Cleveland, but it's up there in the University Circle area by the Art Museum and the Museum of Contemporary Art and the hospitals and whatnot. So.
Are you an Indians fan?
I like to suffer a little bit, so I'll follow Cleveland sports every now and again, but only when I want to feel the pain.
Well, how much restricted your education? And your teachers now, so I assume you both like have doctorates, right?
I just have an MFA.
Okay. Where did you go?
I went to, I had a circuitous route because I got my undergraduate degree was in philosophy from Ball State, and then I went to grad school to get an MA in philosophy at Ohio University. And then I took like 10 years off and toured with bands. We were talking about this earlier for a long time. And then I went back and got my MFA, the Warren Wilson MFA program for writers in North Carolina.
Would you recommend that program?
It's a great program.
Are we getting paid to say that?
That was really crummy. No, I think that the program, like I graduated 11 years ago. I think the program has changed. In terms of the makeup of the faculty now, the program has changed quite a lot. And they still have really great people there, but if I were going into an MFA program today, with my interests as they are, I probably wouldn't go there now because they don't have the faculty there that I was really interested in working with at the time.
Then I'm going to ask, where would you go?
Where would I go now? Where would I go now? You know, I probably would want to go to I just taught at the University of Texas Austin in the fall as a visiting
Just there at the Visitor Center?
And yeah, I taught for the Missioner and for the New Writers Project because they have 2 MFAs there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a terrific program.
It seems to be the place that everybody's talking about.
And Virginia Tech is great too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're okay.
Joshua's class, Case Western.
Yeah. I'd go to Case
Do you guys have an MFA?
I don't know what they're. I know they have a PhD. They have a PhD and an MA in Lit. bit. I don't think they actually have, they have an undergrad in creative writing, but I don't think they have a graduate program in creative writing.
And that's what you teach, creative writing?
I teach poetry as literature and composition. So.
And did your, I'm monopolizing.
Get it, girl.
So somebody needs to talk, please just shut me up. Where did you do your studies to prepare?
I got my first undergrad at Ohio University, and then I got an undergrad in just English lit with a concentration, actually fiction writing, and then I took a few years off, and for some, I still don't know why, I went back to, I was living in Atlanta and San Diego, and then moved back to Ohio and got with a degree in management information systems at Miami, Ohio.
Trying to get a real job, is that?
Well, I think I was trying to get a real job. It wasn't my place, and that whole tech bubble burst right in the middle of my program. So I left that program after a year and a half with a degree in hand and no job prospects.
Might as well be a poet then.
Yeah, and then I went to University of Colorado for my master's, and I went to University of Nebraska for my PhD. So.
Do you think it helped you as an artist? To be educated?
That's a kind of a trick question. I mean, I think there's certain aspects of higher education that are beneficial to someone who's interested in the arts, and there's a lot of things that are antithetical to being an artist. And I feel like having done all now, I can try to go back and pick and choose particular things and do things better. You know, but one part of me says it's a terrible idea, and another part of me says it's a really good idea. And you know, it's like everything in life. There's pros and cons to whatever decision you make, and you know what those things are after you've done it. You know?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's very helpful too.
I think one thing I would add to that is that I think one of the things about a master's program or like a creative PhD that they have now, one thing you get out of those programs that you really can't get anywhere else is that community. And you know, I learned as much from my peers as I learned from my professors, and maybe more. And those relationships have followed me around in poetry for all these years now, and they were really important. Really important.
Yeah, and I think that just to piggyback on what Matt just said is, I think if anyone was considering doing something like that, I wouldn't do it for the degree. I would do it for a particular program and who's there. And you know, I think maybe some of my reservations might have had to do with going to places that maybe weren't necessarily exactly suited for me. But if there's a place that you know that the other students there and the professors there are what you want, you probably could have an extremely positive experience. But I mean, to just do it to get a degree is probably the totally wrong reason to do it. You probably won't get what you want out of it.
There's a woman who's raised her hand every single time, and I just want to make sure you ask your question.
It was an abandoned name, so hold on. You might have just touched on it a little bit when you were talking in one of your poems about neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And kind of barrenness of that. And I wondered if you could just maybe give the backstory, your thoughts on neighborhoods and contemporary places now. Or neighbors, I should say specifically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things that comes up in that, you know, poem over and over again is how I don't really know my neighbors. And we live in, you know, one of the sort of older neighborhoods in Cincinnati, Westwood, which was the first neighborhood to the west of the city that was built right after World War II, so as the city was sort of expanding. And it's a sort of old working class neighborhood, super conservative neighborhood. Everybody kind of keeps to themselves. And so I don't really know my neighbors at all. I love my neighborhood. I love the trees. I love, you know,
The inanimate
sitting outside. I love looking at the sky. You know,
We have that in our neighborhood.
I love that in my house. You know, and I like the quiet. But
Do you miss that connection, I suppose? Do you find that something?
oh, do I miss being connected to my neighbors? I got enough friends. No, I mean everyone's friendly enough, but like we don't know each other, and it does seem very strange to me that like we all live in these boxes like feet from each other. We have no idea about the people that are like living so close to us on all sides. And all the houses, they don't look exactly the same, but they look the same enough, and the yards look the same, and everybody smiles the same and waves the same, and we have the same dogs, and we walk them the same. But everyone's really different, and I'm well aware of that. And that's a little disconcerting and weird to me in some ways, but I guess that's the way it is.
Thank you.
Do you play a musical instrument?
Do I?
Yeah.
Yeah, I play guitar and sing.
I knew it.
We should show.
No way.
And you're not your wife too?
I came
Could you
to
repeat that question?
she said, have I written all my life? I came to poetry really late, actually. I didn't like poetry at all in high school. I played in bands from the time I was 14 and started writing songs immediately. But yeah, I didn't really start writing poems until I was 20. I was 20. So, I mean, more than half my life at this point, but I came to poetry pretty late by a lot of standards.
What about you in music? You've been doing music all your life?
I knew since, can you hear me? Hello. I knew since I was 3 years old because we had this VHS tape of this Racine cartoon, and Carol King did the soundtrack. It's called Rosie. And I looked at her and I'm like, yep, I want to do that. And I would watch it 10 times a day. And it would play it and I would push rewind, wait, watch it again. I know to this day, I know all of the lyrics. And
Prove it.
Yeah.
Keep going.
I really do know it. It's a little sad. Yeah.
So,
I think, I feel like there's a lot of really, really, really bad poetry being published. And I'm wondering,
Present company.
I'm wondering, how do you know, for you guys, when is it good? How can you describe a good poem? How can you say, these are the elements of a good poem or a good song?
go ahead, Professor.
Matt's an editor. He actually selects poems for his journal, so maybe you should take that one.
I have no idea how to answer that question. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I want to be surprised.
Well, you have to have enough confidence to put your poems out there, even if you don't get the kind of reaction you expect.
Yeah.
So you have to have maybe an intuitive sense about your own work, or maybe, something in it that says, yeah, this is good. We can't all be Nick, who sells part of his soul to get people like you up here.
By the way, Mr. B, I think it's a really amazing question, but I think it's a really hard question. I mean, I can talk about what I want from a poem, but even if I tell you what that is, it's not going to be specific enough that it's going to make much sense. But I mean, one of the things I would say is that I always want to be surprised by a poem somehow. Either in terms of the form, in terms of the language, in terms of the content, in terms of the way that the poet is using music. I like being surprised by something, and oftentimes in my own poems, if something feels like it's not right or it's wrong, that's exactly the moment that I like key in and think it's probably working pretty well. Because I think with my art students, it's really funny because they come to art school thinking that we're going to teach them a bunch of things and they're going to come out the other end as artists. And really what we're trying to do is create an atmosphere wherein they can figure out who they are and sort of tap into their own unique weirdness. We all have our own unique weirdness. And do something as a result of that that I never could have predicted or expected. And that's when I know it's working, you know? And I think you know, the longer I write poems, it gets harder and harder to keep finding ways to like surprise myself and do things that I don't expect and can't predict. But that's the goal. I mean, that's the thing that I always sort of want. But I still, you know, and I still don't think that answers the question. I think it's a great question, but I don't know.
Well, unfortunately, I've judged 3 different poetry writing contests right in succession, and it's really not sat well with me. So maybe could you answer this question? If you could say, if I could write like this, or if I could sing like this person, or if I could write something like this poem, what poem would it be, or who would it be, or you just want to be, you know?
Well, my problem with that would be that if I'm trying to write like,
well, as good as.
I think in
Just say Nick Dempsey. Just get it out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think even to say as good as, I would have to have some preconceived notion about the expectations of good. And the moment that you have a set of expectations that are out there for your work, you're shut down. I mean, those are the limits of your world.
Wow.
The point at which you can sort of break through whatever those preconceived, preordained expectations are, both from outside and the ones that you have in your own head, that's where you get to you. And there are, you know, there are a variety of ways of like getting out from under yourself and doing that, I think. But yeah, I wouldn't want to write like anybody, but I do. I mean, you know, like.
I think the other thing at issue as well, I mean, there's several things. I think one is, you know, there's a lot of different types of poetry, and different people gravitate towards different types of work. So someone who might be inclined to, let's say, narrative poem might find a conceptual poem to be aesthetically hideous and unreadable, whereas someone who is really, let's say, into a conceptual poem might say the same thing about a narrative poem. So different people have different sort of aesthetic proclivities and tastes, and a lot of times what I found in the poetry world, people from disparate aesthetics don't want to access or don't want to understand another aesthetic. Now that's not a blanket, I should say that's a blanket statement, because there's a lot of people who like to transgress or cross boundaries. But that's one thing that's at issue, is the variety of aesthetics out there that definitely cater to different types of people and different tastes. You know, but in a really, I think, generic sense, I think, at least for me, something that is both, well, and I should go back to say that there are certain things within each of those aesthetics that are important and interesting, and they're not always the same for each aesthetic. But that being said, I like poetry, both reading as a reader and as a writer, that I feel A, moves me emotionally, B, has some musicality to it, and C, has some technical chops or expertise. Because, you know, you could write the technically, poetically tightest poem out there, but it not move or have any sort of emotion to it. Or you could, you know, be writing in your journal, be writing some very emotional things, but it not have, the words not have a certain form. You know, poetry comes from the word poiesis, the Greek word meaning to shape or to form. You know, so I think trying to come to a balance between that emotional content and also a technical expertise, and again, that whatever that technical expertise is going to shift from aesthetic to aesthetic. And like Matt said, sometimes you just want to do something new too. You know, create something new, a new poem that kind of defies previous aesthetic tendencies, which makes it difficult. Ultimately, it comes down to, I don't want to say it comes down to a matter of taste, but, you know, I think different readers are going to have different opinions about things. And, you know, I think someone who's read a lot of, let's say, lyric poetry can know what are good qualities about a lyric poem and what are less positive qualities about a lyric poem, and probably can make some, you know, I don't want to say an objective call on what a good a lyric poem is, but they'll have a decent background on which to, you know, make a judgment call. But, you know, at the end of the day, I would agree with Matt, that is a really kind of tricky thing to say, this is a bad poem, or this is a good poem, or what makes a good poem, and what makes a bad poem.
So how do you grade students' things when they come in?
This is failed.
I don't give grades on poems. I make lots of written comments, and I point students toward people that I think they might share some aesthetic tendencies with, and I encourage students to undermine their habits, and you know, and I try to respond as thoughtfully as I can to like what they're doing, but I don't give them grades. You know, I mean, it's like if they show up for class and they turn in a poem every week and they're like engaged, everybody gets an A. You know, like it's not. Yeah.
And you can also grade in the sense that, like, if a student brings in a poem that's, you know, composed of all end-stopped lines, you could say, okay, well, for homework, I want you to bring in a revised version of this poem that contains all in jam lines. And if they bring it in and they've done it, well, then they've done it. And you, in that way, you had them A, write a poem, B, revise a poem, and C, do it in two different ways. You know, so you can grade upon certain criteria, but, you know, I don't, yeah, you know.
But if people are just bringing in their poems, and you're not like saying, okay, I want you to write a perfect Petrarchan sonnet, you know, then like they bring in a perfect Petrarchan sonnet, I can grade that, you know, check, you did, you know, you do all these things. But of course, you know, probably writing a perfect Petrarchan sonnet is going to be a bad one.
I think there was one more hand up before we go. Oh, there you go.
I hate to admit this in a poetry reading, but I'm not a reader of poetry. I don't remember being exposed to poetry so much as a child.
Welcome.
Nursery rhymes.
Well, I teach 4-year-old kindergarten, so yes, I have to say nursery rhymes. But as an adult now, do you have a recommendation of where I would start if I wanted to read more poetry? That table.
The way that I would go about that is I would be glad to talk to you more, and I would ask you questions about things that you like, and then I would make recommendations based on that. As opposed to just saying, well, here's what I like, because, you know, I like all
Do you want
kinds
to
of...
take a class? Like, maybe I would go take a class, or just go to the library?
You could, I mean,
Library.
if you wanted a sort of introduction to poetry, then yeah, I mean, you could take like an American, you know, poetry class from 1900 to 1950, or I mean, there are a lot of ways you could go about that. There are all kinds of introductions to literature. You could definitely do something like that. And you could get an anthology, but I also think that there's so much great contemporary poetry that's being written, like by Nick Dinsky, for example, that. And I think a lot of that stuff's not being taught in classrooms. And so, you know, that's the kind of thing you can get recommendations from people on. They can sort of point you in a direction that you might like.
But yeah, and he's right here. Yeah, he's a great resource. I mean, Nick is a fantastic. Nick's a fantastic poet, and you know, talking to.
Let's focus on me for a while.
But no, ultimately, like to find great poetry, whether it's contemporary or modern or classic poetry, usually it helps to talk to poets who write good poetry and poets who are invested in the art and practice of poetry, and just chat them up and talk to them. And like I said, I mean, I don't even mean that jokingly. I mean, he's here in your community is a great resource, and I would trust what that guy says.
Just for maybe a concluding sentence, since I've been brought into this conversation, and I think there's some overlap between that is being asked, like, do you think you should go to school? Will it help your poetry? Things like that. And his answer, and to some degree Josh's answer, is, well, you get a community out of it, and that's the most valuable thing. You're sitting in a room with a bunch of other people who just, and this goes to everyone, with a bunch of other people who just tolerated at least 2 poetry readings, which is more than most people will do. So you guys have your own community to start with. You can work within each other. Nick Ramsey back there in this very space every other Wednesday runs an open mic here, so you can hear things that people around are reading and working on and trying to share with others. And also you just got to meet 2 living poets who you can email, and they will email you back pretty much every time. And of course, then there's me in the public library. But the last thing I'll say about that is that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars less than getting a degree. And it won't have the same things. It won't have all the advantages. But if you're just feeling like I wanna learn this way, then it's possible.
Let's have some love for Nick Dembski.
Right.
Thank you.
Sign up on the email list, buy some books, buy some CDs, buy some beautiful pottery in the back. Thank you so much to our performers, and thank you guys all for coming tonight.